Arboretum Chapel. As the UK's year-round centre of remembrance, the National Memorial Arboretum is designed to be spiritually uplifting, to honour the fallen, recognise service and sacrifice, and to foster pride in the United Kingdom. It's a living and lasting memorial celebrating those who have given their lives in the service of their countries, those who have served and suffered as a result of conflict, and others who, for specific or appropriate reasons, are also commemorated here. The National Memorial Arboretum is part of the Royal British Legion family of charities. It's visited by more than 300,000 visitors each year, including service personnel, veterans, families, and students of all ages. In a few moments' time, we'll be observing a silence in this chapel. We ask you to pause in silent tribute to the memory of the millions of people who've lost their lives in conflicts and wars throughout the world. We especially remember all those who died in defense of these islands and those who were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice in the cause of peace and freedom across the globe. The idea of a 2-minute silence appears to have been suggested first in an article by the Australian journalist Edward Honey in the London Evening News on the 8th of May 1919. On the 4th of November that year, the British government's cabinet received a letter in support of the suggestion from Sir Percy Fitzpatrick, whose son had been killed in France in 1917. Sir Percy suggested that a silence be observed on the anniversary of the end of the war in memory of those who had died in service of their country. King George V agreed and issued a personal request that on the 11th of November there would be for 2 minutes a complete suspension of all normal activities. A ceremony was then held every year at the Cenotaph in Whitehall, but the practice was suspended in 1939 following the outbreak of World War II. After the war, the ceremony was moved to the nearest Sunday to the 11th of November, which was subsequently designated Remembrance Sunday. Here at the Arboretum, we observe this act of remembrance every day of the year. You will shortly hear the last post, which will then be followed by a 2-minute silence, in turn followed by the bugle call for Reveille. On November the 11th, at this precise moment, this chapel is designed so that shafts of sunlight will fall onto its altar. In a similar way, light also shines on the central wreath of the Armed Forces Memorial. The light symbolizes the hope that all the people of the world will one day live in peace and freedom. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. When you go home, tell them of us, and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today.
Good morning and welcome to the virtual welcome talk at the National Memorial Arboretum. My name is Jane and I am one of the volunteers at the Arboretum, and shortly I will be telling you a little more about the National Memorial Arboretum, which celebrates its 19th birthday today. You have just heard the daily Act of Remembrance. Held on site every day of the year, the music you heard is Nimrod and the voice is Jeremy Paxman. Although our site is currently closed, our daily Act of Remembrance continues to be broadcast each day in our chapel. The Arboretum is the only place in the UK where a daily Act of Remembrance takes place. How did the Arboretum come about in the first place? Well, it started with conversations between the late Group Captain Sir Leonard Cheshire and a gentleman whom we now regard as the founder of the Arboretum, David Childs, who was at that time a commander in the Royal Navy. They were both worried that we, in this country, were beginning to forget to remember the debt we owe to so many people in order that we could have the freedoms that we now take for granted. And they wished to ensure that acts of remembrance remained part of our national consciousness. They wondered what they could do to again focus the nation's attention on those sacrifices. And it was David Childs who came up with the idea of the Arboretum after visiting the American National Arboretum and the Arlington Cemetery, thinking, could we combine concepts from each of those, but something that will be alive and there for the next generation and the generations after that to visit? And that is what we have, a living memorial to service and sacrifice, with 150 acres of parkland, over 380 memorials and about 30,000 trees, most of them now dedicated to individual people, military units, charities and other organisations. Note I said service and sacrifice because about 20% of the memorials are not at all military, for example with memorials for police, fire, ambulance services, the Women's Institute, the Salvation Army, the Post Office and the Quakers. On his return from America, David Childs set about raising support and funds to also seek out a site for his Arboretum, and was fortunate to gain the backing of the then Prime Minister John Major in the early 1990s. Not money, just backing. But that helped to put David in touch with the directors of a company called Redland Aggregates, who offered the use of this site, 150 acres of land, on a 999-year lease for a peppercorn rent of £1 a year. As the name implies, Redland Aggregates had extracted sand and gravel from this site, then infilled it and scraped the topsoil back over. Basically, it was a muddy field. However, apart from the small rent, there were other advantages, the main one being that it's in the centre of the country and therefore equally accessible from north, south, east and west. And it is within the boundaries of the National Forest, whose experts have given us invaluable advice on what to plant, how to plant it, and how to look after our plants and trees as they grow. You can see the results for yourself. It is working. The first plantings began in the mid-1990s, and sufficient money was raised to build a small visitor centre, parts of which have been incorporated into our new building, and the Millennium Chapel of Peace and Forgiveness, so named because it was dedicated in Millennium Year 2000. The Arboretum was officially opened to the public in 2001. The chapel where this talk would traditionally take place is designed to feel like a woodland glade where visitors may sit quietly for as long as they wish. There are 12 columns of Douglas fir representing the 12 apostles, and each has a face on it. There are more than 380 memorials at the Arboretum, including the largest, the Armed Forces Memorial. The Armed Forces Memorial was dedicated in 2007 in the presence of Her Majesty the Queen. There are around 16,200 names engraved on the memorial, representing those who were killed on duty as a result of terrorist action or died in operational theatre, training accidents, since the end of World War II. There is room for a further 15,000 names. The first names shown are from 1945, which was the Palestine conflict, and carries on in date order until the present day. There are 2 sculptures on the memorial itself, both by sculptor Ian Rank Broadley. The one on the left shows 4 servicemen, sailor, soldier, airman and Royal Marine, bringing a badly injured serviceman on a stretcher back to his wife and child, while at the other end of the group are his distraught parents. The sculptor's message here is that for every name on the wall, it is not just the death, but also the effect on families that we must remember. On the other sculpture, a dead serviceman is being prepared for burial by a female soldier and a Gurkha. On the right, the stonemason's next job will be to carve yet another name on the wall, while the left side figure is pointing through the great doors of eternity, which are slightly open. In effect, he is saying, "Your life on this earth is now finished. This is the way to the next world." And we look through to see greenery, a pleasant place on the other side. There is another effect from the open doors, for there is a corresponding gap in the outer curved wall, and if the sun happens to be shining at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the time the guns fell silent at the end of World War I, the war to end all wars, then a shaft of sunlight comes through the outer wall, through the gap in the doors, and at exactly 11 o'clock bisects the bronze wreath which is in the centre of the memorial. Now, unfortunately, the Arboretum is not government funded. We are a charity, part of the Royal British Legion's family of charities, but we have to be self-supporting. That means we need to raise at least £4,000 a day to stay open. And the only way we can do that is with thanks to our visitors. We do not charge an entrance fee, so that anyone who has a memorial to a loved one here, or perhaps a special name on the wall, can visit as often as they wish without having to pay to do so. So we rely on donations, and although you are currently not able to donate physically on site at the moment, you can still support our work by donating online via our website. The Arboretum's vision is to be the nation's year-round place to remember, an inspirational world-class setting freely open to all. We must do this so that the unique contribution of those who have served and sacrificed is never forgotten. The baton of remembrance is passed on through the generations. There is a year-round space for all to celebrate lives lived and commemorate lives lost. Much work has taken place over the last 19 years, but there is still much to do. We have plans to develop our landscape further, creating areas of reflection and discovery, whilst embracing the challenges of climate change. We will continue to develop an engaging programme of events and activities to educate future generations, encourage new visitors, and provide our nation with new ways to remember. We cannot do this without your support.